This is Kansas Talk with Andy Hooser.
Welcome back into the program. Thanks for hanging out today, as always, here on Kansas Talk on Wichita's Big Talker KQAM. Really happy to have this guy back in studio. It's been a little bit since we've talked after recapping election season and going through legislative session of 2023, which was madness. As you know, last week we talked with Senate President Ty Masterson and Speaker of the House Dan Hawkins in studio with us for our recap, but to talk about some of the electoral issues that we worked on throughout the session as well. In studio with us, Secretary of State Scott Schwab. Scott,
Andy,
how are you, my friend?
I'm great. Andy, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's always good to chat with you. Before we get in specifically to election stuff, just the session overall, I know you work with a lot of legislators, obviously, for the things you do, for the business side of stuff, election side of stuff, but in your opinion, just how was the session from your side?
From our side, it was great. We got every bill we wanted. The ones we were concerned with didn't advance, and none of our bills were vetoed by the governor. So we were able to build some pretty strong consensus. And so, I mean, it was time. We had a lot of statutory cleanup that needed to be done.
Sure.
And it seems for the last 20 years, every time we try to do that, people try to just, weigh it down with all these absurd amendments. But the Democrats right now don't want to touch elections. And the Republicans that are concerned, that are believing fallacies about, any compromise in elections that Kansas may or may not have, there's not a majority to pass anything. So it was an opportunity to clean up some statute.
Yeah. There was, I always say that our elections, while we always have ways to fine tune it, find ways to tweak it, we have one of the best ones in the nation because the fact that other states like to base a lot of their new election laws and reforms off of what we're doing here in the state of Kansas.
Yeah. And so the two states, a lot of times as states, we look for things that the Democrats do, what do the Republicans do, and what can we do to get passed?
Right.
And this was my frustration with what happened with Georgia. And I'm a big baseball fan, but to pull the All-Star game was a farce.
Right.
Because what Brad did in Georgia, or the legislature actually did it, was they did voter ID for advanced mail ballots.
Right.
The Democrats down there actually liked it because signature verification is so arbitrary.
Sure.
So they looked at our law, Minnesota's law, and Colorado's law. So where did they move the All-Star game? To Colorado. They had the same law. And so it's this emotional reaction. And I'll say both sides do it, but it's kind of a vindication because, they said it's voter suppression. Well, guess what? It was the highest voter turnout.
Right.
Warnock gets reelected. And what's the first thing he says? Well, it was voter suppression. Well, so you got elected by voter suppression?
Right.
So we've got to start changing the conversation, not just in Kansas, but nationally. Sometimes elections are done well.
Right, exactly, yeah. And while there are many states that have a lot of issues on electoral issues, I don't think Kansas is one of those.
No, and if we didn't prove it before, we sure did after those recounts.
Yeah.
Nothing changed. And I really feel vindicated for our clerks.
Right.
Because while during that harsh primary, I was attacked personally, really who they're attacking is the work of our election volunteers and our clerks. And these are your neighbors. These are family friends. Some of them are high school students. You're accusing them of committing fraud.
Sure.
And, after those recounts, it was like, hey, told you there was nothing to see here.
Yeah, it worked out pretty well. Let's talk about some of the bills you guys worked on this year. The only one that I was aware of, unfortunately, I don't think happened, but trying to get rid of the grace period for mail-in ballots to make sure that everything's in by election day. And I don't think that one happened.
Well, it did get to the governor's desk. That's the one she vetoed.
Okay.
And we've been consistent saying that is absolutely a policy decision.
Sure.
So the way we got the 3-day grace period, just a little history, was Democrat clerk out of Douglas County, Jamie Shue, and then Republican Secretary of State, Chris Kobach, coordinated together because almost all the mail processing centers left Kansas.
Sure.
So if you're in liberal, your mail goes to either New Mexico or Tulsa. Wichita sometimes goes to Oklahoma City. Anything on the east side goes to Kansas City, Missouri, Hayes, and the western northwest corridor. Everything goes to Denver.
Right.
And so every ballot leaves the state, and you're hoping it comes back to show up to the clerk's office. So Jamie wanted a 5-day grace period. Chris wanted 1 or 2. They split the difference, said 3. That's how it got there.
Sure.
So now after the 2020 election and after the school board elections in 2021, folks were like, well, why do we have this?
Mm-hmm.
It was because of that agreement. So they tried to end it at 7 o'clock, elections over. That is completely a policy decision for the legislature. We're neutral. All we did is clean up technical things in their bill to make sure they don't. It's in line with the rest of the statute.
Sure.
But yeah, the governor vetoed that, and they didn't have the votes to override.
Yeah, it was an interesting conversation because I get it, and I kind of agree with it as well. But because to me, we have mail-in ballot options for like 2 months with early voting, a month and a half. It's a month and a half, so you have plenty of time to get in. If you're waiting to drop your ballot into the mail the day before election day, then come on, man.
Well, see, and that's a valid point. And I will also say we've had people. I was talking to Donna, clerk out in Russell County. And last year, she said, yeah, I got a ballot that showed up 7 months late that was mailed 3 weeks early.
Wow. Interesting.
And then I was sharing that story with Dory, the Finney County clerk down in Garden City. She goes, oh, that's nothing. I had one show up a year and a half later.
Really?
That was mailed 3 weeks early.
Wow.
So this is what I know. People are like, why do we have those Dropboxes? That's why we have them.
That's why.
Because that way your ballot is always handled by a Kansan.
Sure.
It's not handled by somebody else. And we have monitors on them, and it's handled by 2 people of 2 different parties, as opposed to a postal worker that may or may not send it to the clerk's office.
Well, and that's the thing, and we don't need to go down this road again, but I didn't care for drop boxes until we saw the system that we have in place here. It's not like other states where it's just, okay, it's almost like the mail. You do your thing. There's no validation there. Right. With ours, they're secured, and then you validate the signature on it, and you validate everything else. So it is secure. And if someone does try to drop in some type of fake one, then it is easily catchable, but it doesn't have to go through that postal system.
Right. It doesn't have to go through the system. We have a security envelope. We have voter ID for it, and you don't know how to print that ballot off. You don't know the paperweight. You don't know what kind of code is on there to verify that ballot's for that election. But along with that is we're not like California where anybody can put a Dropbox by their business or their organization. Yeah. And as a matter of fact, in California, we picked up 2 Republican seats because the Republicans say, well, if they're going to put drop boxes, we'll put them in our church.
Right.
And so the churches started ballot harvesting, and they're all playing by the same rules now. But in Kansas, you can't put a drop box out in front of your station here.
Exactly.
That's against the law. And that's the difference when they talk about, the 2,000 mules thing is those drop boxes aren't owned by the government.
Right. Yeah. So apparently I can't put a Dropbox in my radio studio here.
Well, you can. You want to look at that would be voter fraud.
that would be voter fraud. All right. Well, we'll make sure not to do that one. Talk about some of the modernization stuff that you worked on, though, because it has been a relatively successful year for you.
It really was. We've been trying to make some of these changes for over 25 years. And again, a little more history because I'm a nerd. Back when we became a state, people from Missouri would kidnap our poll workers. Because they didn't want us to vote the legislature to have, anti-slavery legislators and members of Congress.
Right.
So they put it in statute in 1865, I believe, that said if the poll workers don't show up, you can elect your own poll workers so you can carry out the election.
Sure.
We don't need that today,
right.
Especially when we're doing some background checks on poll workers. It's training. It's a little bit more involved to be a poll worker than it was in the 1800s. That law needed to come out.
Sure.
Another problem we had, and I think Karen Tyson had a legitimate concern when she asked for some recounts in her treasurer's race against now Treasurer Steve Johnson. She didn't know which county she wanted the recounts in because the Board of Canvassers haven't met.
Right.
But according to law, you had to ask for it before they met. Well, what happened was she requested her counties, and then after the Board of Canvassers met, some of the counties flipped.
Right.
And and that was something we tried to fix in the past. We haven't been able to. Now we do the recount after the Board of Canvassers meet.
Sure.
And that way, if there's a contest or if there's been an administrative error,
exactly where to focus
you know
on.
where to focus on. Some of the other things we did is a lot of times, it's funny, it's actually a Wichita story, is in the mayor's race in 2021, 60-some people voted for Epstein didn't kill himself. It's not even a person, it's a phrase. We said, especially in larger communities, if you're going to do a write-in campaign, you have to do an affidavit with the clerk's office.
Interesting.
That way, then yours will be counted.
Right.
But Mickey Mouse is not counted anymore. Donald Duck, Goofy, Bugs Bunny.
How many of those do you see, really?
In a county like Sedgwick, thousands.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Depending on the race.
Interesting.
And so now those have to be counted. So it's taking workload off our clerks. It's really freeing up time for the Board of Canvassers.
Right.
So they can really focus on the ballots that are questionable. Did the signature match?
Right.
Was it the correct ID?
Yeah.
And so they can focus on more important things than Goofy and Mickey Mouse. So we fixed that. The other thing we did is if you do a school bond election, you had 30 days to set it.
Okay.
But according to UACAVA, federal law for military, you have to give 45 days to send out a ballot.
Sure.
So we were in violation.
Okay.
So we were able to extend that to 45 days. So the voters won't realize what we did, but it makes it so much easier on the administration of an election,
It's
which eliminates errors,
Exactly.
which eliminates errors, which increases confidence.
Yeah, that is good news. I mean, yeah, when we're streamlining that, then it's your workers can do things efficiently, like you said, to make sure, even though we are already accurate to the best we can right now, it just helps that process even more.
Absolutely. And anything you can do to eliminate errors, variance, and waste provides a more efficient, trustworthy election.
Yeah. Is there still conversation at all from legislators, especially with any kind of bills that they talk to you about this year, about the electronic side of it, the security side of the electronic voting machines, that sort of stuff?
No, there was some talk about folks trying to eliminate machines, but you're really eliminating security when you do that.
Sure.
If, you can say, well, what if someone hacks the machine, which is hard to do because they're not on a network. And we passed the law the year before that says you can't do that.
Right.
But if all you do is have people marking it, now you're increasing the human error rate.
Sure.
And humans make mistakes. Humans get math wrong. Humans miscount, misunderstand, misread. As a matter of fact, in some of the counties that there was a slight change in the value of them both count, it was because people didn't mark their ballot correctly.
Sure.
So it says use this pen and fill in the oval, almost like your old ACT test you took or didn't take.
Right.
And some people just draw a line through it.
Yeah.
Well, that may not get counted, and now you got a board of canvasser trying to judge what the voter intent was.
Sure.
Whereas, like in Sedgwick, they have the touchscreen machines. Every ballot is on paper, and
Sure.
that is by law. We call it paper ballot voter verification.
Okay.
So you have a piece of paper. You can look at it and make sure that it votes for the people you say. And it's not ink, it's burned into the paper. So
Sure.
it's hard to fraudulate it. And you know definitely the voter's intent.
Yeah.
And you put it in the ballot box to be counted. Those are very secure. But in that machine, there's a stick that's taking a tally. That's what they upload to their computer. So on the website and in major election years, you can look at our website and get an idea who's winning, who's losing. Just
Gotcha.
a thermometer. And then they also have an image of those ballots.
Okay.
The advantage of that is, you can't hack a sheet of paper, but you can catch it on fire.
Sure.
You can burn it. Well, now we have an image to make sure your vote still counts if someone did attack a tabulator and burn your ballot.
It is nice to have that extra security backup, especially with other states where, mail in or even just paper ballots just end up missing or just randomly appear in the back of someone's trunk of a car or something.
Yeah. So, and it's funny because we hear those stories and they say, oh, this must be happening in Kansas, but every state's different. I think
Yeah.
Wisconsin's really fascinating. They don't run their elections by the county.
Sure.
They run them by the city.
Right.
Well, what if you live in the country? Where do you go vote?
Right. Exactly.
The nearest town. Well, that town may be a town of 900 people. So the clerk is a volunteer and doesn't even have an office.
Sure.
So the clerk's got to count the ballots. So they put them in her car and she drives to her house.
Yep.
And they get around the kitchen table and they're counting the
They're counting
ballots
them. That's
in
what
her
they
house.
do.
And then all of a sudden the next day she realizes, oh, wait, I left a bag in my trunk.
Right.
Well, everybody said, well, that's fraud. No, it's incompetence.
There is that. There is that for sure. We're talking with Scott Schwab, Secretary of State for the state of Kansas. Let's talk about real quickly Sedgwick County. I know that we've gone through a few different rotations for election commissioners in the area. How are we going into the off season this year and then for the big election next year here in Sedgwick County?
So, Laura Rainwater, visited with her yesterday. She's doing really well. There's always some disruptions when you have leadership change. Angela did a fantastic job. I love her, but it was a stressful job, and the county commission was not too interested in funding the office to give her the resources she needed. And so she was working probably 10 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Right.
But she couldn't get paid overtime because she was salaried.
Of course.
And so she was the lowest paid person on the staff, but yet she was taking all the bullets at a very heated time. So she just was done. And I wish her well. I hated to see her go, but she did well. But Laura Rainwater came in. She's been an election judge. She has the understanding of the voter interaction side and the technology. Now it's the registration, putting the calendar together, getting things printed, and managing the office. And she has a great relationship with the county commission. They've approved 5 FTEs for her to make sure that they are able to execute better on election and kind of take off that work burden.
Sure.
One commissioner said, well, we're just more efficient than the other 4 big counties. No, you're not, because when you have a 3-hour wait or even an hour wait, that's not efficiency. And I tell folks, we can talk about, government spending too much or too little, but nobody will argue the fact that elections are a function of government. Right. You don't prioritize that, or you don't privatize that.
Right.
So it is a function that the county needs to pay for. We've always said we believe elections are best run locally and funded locally.
Yeah.
And that's why we're against DC grants to us. I don't want the money. I want if they pay for it themselves, they can do with what they can handle with the resources of which they generate.
Sure. Well, and it sounds like it's going to be an interesting change next year as well with the primaries. It sounds like since we're going from kind of the own parties doing their own things to actually having a primary election in the state.
Yeah, and that's the only year they're going to do it. So I think it's more of an experimental thing, and we helped draft it a little bit just so it was done in a way that we can actually execute on the election. But the reason why it's called a presidential preference primary as opposed to a primary is normally when we have a primary in August, whoever wins the primary's name is on the general ballot in November.
Right.
That's not the case here. So you're going to have candidates that'll pay $10,000 to get on the ballot, and then Super Tuesday is going to hit. Some of those people are going to drop out of the race.
Sure.
So we may elect somebody who's already dropped out of the race, or like what happened with our caucus before. And it's up to the parties to determine how much weight that presidential primary covers. It might say only whoever wins that only gets 30% of our delegates. The rest are appointed by the chair, appointed by a senator, and that's where you get into the super delegates.
I don't like super delegates.
Yeah, so but the parties like to control their system, which is it's their organization. They can do whatever they want to do.
Right.
So this is a situation where the state's going to pay $4.7 million for an election that the winner of the state may never show up on the ballot in November.
Interesting.
You know, or the one they vote for drops out the day of the election. Right. And so now it's $4.7 million that could have probably found a better home, but it's what legislative leaders and the governor wanted.
Sure. It'll be an interesting style to see. I've liked our primary process and how we've kind of done things with the party before. So this, like you said, the experiment will be interesting to see how it goes this year.
It will. Both the Republican, I do take a lot of comfort in this because the chair of the Democrat Party was an opponent of mine. The chair of the Republican Party was an opponent of mine. Both of them criticized the way we do elections, but then they both asked the legislature to ask us to do another election because they know they couldn't do it.
Right.
And I always say that with exuberance because it's justification. And I said that to our clerks when they met last week, and they just started laughing, applauding, like, yes,
great.
The very man and woman that were saying our clerks can't run an election, they're now asking them to do it because they know they are more qualified.
Exactly.
So there's a lot of redemption there. But that being said, we'll see how they haven't written the rules yet. So, but it may increase participation. We'll see.
That'll be interesting. Last couple minutes here as we let you go, Scott, and I appreciate your time as always. But let's shift gears away from elections for just a moment. Obviously, you handle a lot of the business registration stuff going on in the state as well. We're coming out of COVID. Things are starting to get back on track. Are you still seeing new businesses coming into the state, new business applications?
Yeah, so I don't know what the average is now. I know our high was about 140 a day. During COVID, it was 80 a day.
Okay.
So it was getting close to doubling. And so that's why we were always talking about the Business One Stop and update. We're almost off the AS400 that we've been plowing through for 4 years.
Wow.
And we're beta testing some new systems that go along with that. And so if you own an LLC, next year you'll pay your fee. You'll notice it's a bigger fee, but you don't have to pay it for 2 years. So we're alleviating some of that administrative burden on businesses, and then we'll also be able to launch that Business One Stop where you just fill out the wizard and your permits come to you. You don't have to hit all those different silos of government. So we're delivering on what we campaigned on 5 years ago.
Right.
But what I was hoping would take 4 years, it's going to take 5 to 5.5. But most of it will be done by the end of this year.
That'll be nice. That'll help entice, I think, a lot of businesses as well. And individuals just being like, hey, maybe I want to start my home business and just go right to you guys and get it done.
Yeah. So I visited with Ben Sauceda, and he had me visit with the Latino Chamber of Commerce here in Sedgwick County. And you have a lot of Latinos that are legal residents immigrating to the United States legally.
Yeah.
But they have this is like if I moved to Mexico, I wouldn't understand their parliamentary system right away.
Right.
They don't know the difference between our office and the IRS.
Sure.
And so we're working on reaching out to these new groups because they're hairstylists, they own restaurants, they have food trucks, small contractors. And they're living the American dream. It's why they want to immigrate to the United States.
Exactly.
And they're doing it in a legal fashion. And it's nice to reach out to these Latino groups to let them know, here's how you can legally have your business and why you got to file with our office and how we can make it easier for them. And we're launching more and more of that website in a because their Spanish is better than their English.
Sure.
And we want to make sure they're compliant as they continue to assimilate to the American way of life.
I love it. It's good stuff. You guys are rocking it, and a lot of changes, a lot of big stuff happening in the office. So
it's good to update, and I appreciate you letting us update the folks here in Sedgwick County about what we're doing. And it's real positive. It goes to show, I always love Reagan because Reagan got Tip O'Neill to vote for a tax cut. It's because he could find consensus.
Yep.
And we were able to do that through all the noise. We got some significant legislation passed that the governor was more than willing to sign.
Sure.
And so there was a couple of roadblocks. Some grassroots organizations were misunderstanding what we were telling, but sometimes it's like my 9-year-old. Doesn't matter how many times I tell him he's wrong until he finds out himself. He's not going to listen to Dad.
Sometimes you just have to experience the world on your own. It's hard to do sometimes, but sometimes you just got to do it.
Yeah, I got a 19-year-old and a 9-year-old, and the 19-year-old.
You get the best of both worlds.
I
there.
do,
yeah.
and he just rolls his eyes like, "Was I like that, Dad?" I said, "Hell, I was like that."
I love it. It's Scott Schwab, Secretary of State. Scott, it's always good to talk to you, my friend.
Too,
Thank you
sir.
so much for coming in and doing your tour, letting everybody know what's going on. We'll do it again soon.
Will do. Thank you, Andy.
Always a pleasure. Right back here on Kansas Talk on Wichita's Big Talker, KQA.